The crash was nothing short of a nightmare. One moment, the ship glided through the cold void of space, systems humming in perfect rhythm. The next, alarms screamed, and the controls refused to respond as the small spacecraft plummeted toward an unfamiliar planet. The human pilot had done everything he could to stabilize the descent, but the surface came up fast. Too fast. Metal screeched as the hull skidded along the rocky ground, sparks flying until the vessel finally came to a halt, crumpled and smoking, in an alien forest bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow. Dazed but alive, the man clawed his way out of the wreckage. His heart pounded in his chest, every beat echoing his disbelief. The air was breathable, surprisingly warm and laced with an earthy scent that hinted at life, though not the kind he knew. Massive trees towered overhead, their trunks wrapped in vines that emitted soft blue light. In the distance, strange sounds echoed high-pitched trills, almost musical, mixed with the rustle of unseen creatures moving through the foliage. He assessed his injuries, relieved to find only a few scrapes and bruises. His gear, however, hadn't fared as well. The comm system was fried, and the emergency beacon was barely functional. He tried to activate it anyway, hoping against hope that someone would pick up the faint signal. But as he scanned the dense forest around him, the stark reality began to set in. Help wasn't coming, not anytime soon. He was stranded. The first night was the hardest. He stayed near the crash site, using the remnants of the ship for shelter. Sleep was impossible, with the strange sounds and shifting shadows playing tricks on his mind. Every creak of the forest felt like a predator lurking just beyond the firelight. He clutched the small survival knife from his emergency kit, fully aware of how little it would help if something decided he looked like an easy meal. By morning, hunger drove him to venture beyond the wreckage. The forest was alive with color and movement. Brightly colored plants swayed as if moved by an invisible breeze, and small, luminescent creatures darted among the branches. He avoided touching anything, wary of toxins or worse, but managed to find fruit that seemed edible after careful testing. It was tart and strange, but it kept his stomach from growling. As he explored further, he noticed signs of intelligent life. Pathways worn into the ground, strange markings on the trees, and what looked like woven structures high in the canopy. The realization both excited and terrified him. If there were people or beings here, would they be friendly? Or would they see him as a threat? His question was answered sooner than he expected. It happened on the third day, just as he was gathering more fruit. He heard voices, soft, melodic, and distinctly alien. He froze, heart racing, as a group of figures emerged from the trees. They were humanoid, but unmistakably alien, with delicate features and skin that shimmered faintly under the forest's glow. Their large, expressive eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and caution. They weren't warriors or hunters, as he'd feared. In fact, they didn't look much older than teenagers. They wore simple garments, woven from plant fibers, and their movements were hesitant, almost unsure. One of them stepped forward, speaking in a language he didn't understand. Her tone wasn't hostile, but there was an edge of uncertainty, as if she wasn't used to dealing with strangers, or perhaps humans. The man raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. He tried speaking to them, keeping his tone calm and steady, but his words seemed to confuse them further. The group exchanged glances, whispering among themselves in their strange, lilting language. Finally, the one who had spoken first gestured for him to follow. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, to retreat to the relative safety of the crash site. But he knew he couldn't survive alone for long. If these beings could offer shelter or supplies, or even just answers, it was a risk he had to take. He nodded and followed, his mind racing with questions. Who were they? What kind of society did they come from? And, perhaps most importantly, could he trust them? They led him through the forest, moving gracefully despite their hesitation. He noticed how they stayed close together, as if drawing strength from each other. It was strange they didn't have the confident bearing of seasoned explorers or leaders. Instead, they seemed almost inexperienced, like they weren't accustomed to situations like this. It struck him as odd, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing where structures rose from the ground, woven seamlessly into the environment. It wasn't a city, but it was more than a simple village. The buildings glowed softly, their organic shapes blending with the trees and vines around them. Other figures appeared, their reactions ranging from shock to curiosity as they saw him. He was an anomaly in their world, and it was clear they didn't know what to make of him. The group that had found him guided him to the largest structure, where a slightly older figure waited. She seemed to hold a position of authority, though her demeanor was far from commanding. Her eyes studied him carefully, as the others explained presumably how they had found him. After a moment, she spoke, her voice calm but questioning. He could only guess what she was asking. Who was he? Why was he here? Did he mean harm? He did his best to explain using gestures and the few words he'd learned from their language during the trek. It was slow and frustrating, but eventually she seemed to understand enough to nod. She gestured for him to sit, and a bowl of something that looked like broth was brought to him. As he ate, he observed the others. They were watching him just as closely, their expressions a mix of wonder and uncertainty. They seemed so young, so unprepared for the situation unfolding before them. He realized that, for all their apparent intelligence and advanced structures, they lacked the air of a seasoned society. It was as if they were at the very beginning of their journey, a civilization in its infancy. This thought sent a chill down his spine. If they were inexperienced, what would happen if something threatened them, if something more dangerous than him stumbled upon their world? The forest, for all its beauty, was filled with dangers. He had seen the claw marks on the trees, heard the growls in the night. These beings, for all their grace and intelligence, didn't seem equipped to face those threats. And now, his presence had added a new layer of uncertainty to their lives. He didn't know if he could help them, or if he should even try. But as the day turned to night, and the alien stars filled the sky, one thing became clear. His crash had set something in motion, something bigger than himself. The forest seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the planet itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The following morning, he awoke to the soft hum of the forest around him. The alien village was quiet, though the glow of their structures seemed to shift faintly with the rhythm of the planet's day. His mind was still reeling from everything he had seen the previous night, the faces, the language, and the way the aliens seemed to look at him like a riddle they couldn't quite solve. For now, he decided to focus on one goal: understanding them. Without communication, he couldn't know if they were truly allies or if they simply didn't see him as a threat yet. The same group that had found him was already awake and gathered near one of the largest structures. When they noticed him stirring, they exchanged whispers and glances before one of them, a slightly taller alien with deep violet patterns tracing her shimmering skin, approached. She held a bundle of what looked like roots and berries, offering it with a hesitant smile. He accepted it carefully, nodding his thanks and mimed eating to show his gratitude. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him, before rejoining the others. He ate in silence, the food strange but surprisingly palatable. As he observed the group, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were out of their depth. They moved cautiously, their interactions laced with uncertainty. There was no sign of elders or anyone who appeared to hold real authority beyond the woman who had addressed him last night. Even she seemed more like a caretaker than a leader, her actions guided by necessity rather than experience. Later, the group motioned for him to follow them again. They led him deeper into the village, past structures that seemed to pulse with life. The materials used to build them were unlike anything he had ever seen, neither wood nor stone, but something organic that grew and changed as if responding to the environment. The architecture was breathtaking, but it also raised questions. Who had taught them to build like this? Was this knowledge their own, or had it been passed down from a civilization that came before? As they walked, he tried to piece together more about these beings. Their expressions and gestures were undeniably human-like, though their culture seemed vastly different. They worked together seamlessly, but there was a fragility to their unity, as if it hadn't been tested by conflict or hardship. He couldn't help but wonder how they had survived here, in a forest teeming with unseen predators. Was it luck? Or was there something about their way of life that kept danger at bay? After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing where structures rose from the ground, woven seamlessly into the environment. It wasn't a city, but it was more than a simple village. The buildings glowed softly, their organic shapes blending with the trees and vines around them. Other figures appeared, their reactions ranging from shock to curiosity as they saw him. He was an anomaly in their world, and it was clear they didn't know what to make of him. The group that had found him guided him to the largest structure, where a slightly older figure waited. She seemed to hold a position of authority, though her demeanor was far from commanding. Her eyes studied him carefully as the others explained presumably how they had found him. After a moment, she spoke, her voice calm but questioning. He could only guess what she was asking. Who was he? Why was he here? Did he mean harm? He did his best to explain, using gestures and the few words he'd learned from their language during the trek. It was slow and frustrating, but eventually she seemed to understand enough to nod. She gestured for him to sit, and a bowl of something that looked like broth was brought to him. As he ate, he observed the others. They were watching him just as closely, their expressions a mix of wonder and uncertainty. They seemed so young, so unprepared for the situation unfolding before them. He realized that, for all their apparent intelligence and advanced structures, they lacked the air of a seasoned society. It was as if they were at the very beginning of their journey, a civilization in its infancy. This thought sent a chill down his spine. If they were inexperienced, what would happen if something threatened them, if something more dangerous than him stumbled upon their world? The forest, for all its beauty, was filled with dangers. He had seen the claw marks on the trees, heard the growls in the night. These beings, for all their grace and intelligence, didn't seem equipped to face those threats. And now, his presence had added a new layer of uncertainty to their lives. He didn't know if he could help them, or if he should even try. But as the day turned to night, and the alien stars filled the sky, one thing became clear. His crash had set something in motion, something bigger than himself. The forest seemed to hum with anticipation, as if the planet itself was waiting to see what would happen next. The following morning, he awoke to the soft hum of the forest around him. The alien village was quiet, though the glow of their structures seemed to shift faintly with the rhythm of the planet's day. His mind was still reeling from everything he had seen the previous night, the faces, the language, and the way the aliens seemed to look at him like a riddle they couldn't quite solve. For now, he decided to focus on one goal: understanding them. Without communication, he couldn't know if they were truly allies or if they simply didn't see him as a threat yet. The same group that had found him was already awake and gathered near one of the larger structures. When they noticed him stirring, they exchanged whispers and glances before one of them, a slightly taller alien with deep violet patterns tracing her shimmering skin, approached. She held a bundle of what looked like roots and berries, offering it with a hesitant smile. He accepted it carefully, nodding his thanks, and mimed eating to show his gratitude. She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him, before rejoining the others. He ate in silence, the food strange but surprisingly palatable. As he observed the group, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were out of their depth. They moved cautiously, their interactions laced with uncertainty. There was no sign of elders or anyone who appeared to hold real authority beyond the woman who had addressed him last night. Even she seemed more like a caretaker than a leader, her actions guided by necessity rather than experience. Later, the group motioned for him to follow them again. They led him deeper into the village, past structures that seemed to pulse with life. The materials used to build them were unlike anything he had ever seen, neither wood nor stone, but something organic that grew and changed as if responding to the environment. The architecture was breathtaking, but it also raised questions. Who had taught them to build like this? Was this knowledge their own, or had it been passed down from a civilization that came before? As they walked, he tried to piece together more about these beings. Their expressions and gestures were undeniably human-like, though their culture seemed vastly different. They worked together, seamlessly, but there was a fragility to their unity, as if it hadn't been tested by conflict or hardship. He couldn't help but wonder how they had survived here, in a forest teeming with unseen predators. Was it luck? Or was there something about their way of life that kept danger at bay? The tension in the village continued to grow over the next few days. The forest, once alive with soft sounds of nocturnal creatures, was now eerily quiet. Even the glowing trees seemed dimmer, their light pulsing faintly as if retreating from some unseen force. The villagers worked tirelessly, reinforcing their homes and setting up crude barricades along the outskirts of the settlement. Despite their inexperience, they moved with a sense of unity and purpose that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. They were doing everything they could to protect their home, but it was clear they didn't believe it would be enough. He spent his days helping where he could, showing them how to fortify weak points in their defenses and setting up traps along the most vulnerable paths leading into the village. Though they didn't fully understand his methods, they trusted him, their desperation outweighing any lingering doubts about the stranger in their midst. At night, he kept watch with the others, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The growls came more frequently now, always just out of sight, each one more guttural and menacing than the last. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest was bathed in its eerie bioluminescent glow, he noticed something strange. The traps he had set along the perimeter had been triggered, but not in the way he had expected. The mechanisms were intact, but the bait had been taken, and deep claw marks scarred the ground nearby. Whatever had passed through was testing them, probing their defenses with an intelligence that sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't a mindless predator, it was something far more dangerous. When he showed the evidence to the villagers, their reactions confirmed his fears. They recognized the marks, their faces pale with dread. The violet-marked alien brought out the tablet again, this time showing him a series of images that seemed to tell a story. One depicted the creature towering over a group of figures that looked like the villagers, its claws raised in a deadly arc. Another showed the forest in flames, the glowing trees reduced to ash. The final image was of the creature standing alone, its glowing eyes staring out at an empty landscape. He understood the message loud and clear. This wasn't the first time the creature had attacked. And if history was any indication, it wouldn't stop until there was nothing left. The villagers seemed to grow more restless with each passing hour, their fears slowly giving way to desperation. They began to look to him for answers, their trust in him growing stronger despite the language barrier. He felt the weight of their hope pressing down on him, the unspoken expectation that he would find a way to save them. It was a heavy burden, but he couldn't bring himself to turn away. These people, with their fragile yet unyielding determination, had taken him in when they had every reason not to. He owed them whatever help he could give. The nights grew longer, the growls more frequent, until finally the creature revealed itself. It came under the cover of darkness, its massive form silhouetted against the faint glow of the trees. The villagers froze in terror as its glowing eyes swept over the settlement, its presence more menacing than anything he had imagined. It moved with a predatory grace, each step calculated and deliberate, as if it knew the fear it was instilling in its prey. He raised his weapon. The villagers huddled behind him as they watched with wide, terrified eyes. The creature stopped just beyond the perimeter of the village, its glowing eyes locking onto him. For a moment, everything was still. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the air heavy with anticipation. Then, with a deafening roar, it lunged forward, its claws tearing through the first line of defenses, as if they were nothing. The villagers scattered, their fear overwhelming any semblance of order. He fired his weapon, the sharp crack echoing through the night, but the creature barely flinched. It was fast, too fast, its movements a blur as it tore through the barricades and traps they had painstakingly built. The glowing trees around the village dimmed further, their light flickering like a dying flame, as if the forest itself was succumbing to the creature's presence. Despite the chaos, he noticed something strange. The creature wasn't attacking indiscriminately. It was moving with purpose, its focus locked entirely on him. It was testing him, just as it had tested the traps. Each lunge, each swipe of its claws, was designed to push him to his limits, to see how far he could go before he broke. It wasn't just a predator, it was a hunter, and he was its prey. As the night stretched on, the villagers began to regroup, their fear giving way to a desperate determination. They worked together to distract the creature, drawing its attention away from him long enough for him to take another shot. The weapon's energy crackled as it struck the creature's side, finally eliciting a roar of pain. It stumbled, its glowing eyes narrowing in fury, but it didn't retreat. If anything, the attack seemed to make it even more relentless. The battle raged on, the village teetering on the brink of destruction. The glowing structures flickered like dying stars, their light dimming with each passing moment. He knew they couldn't hold out much longer, but he also knew they couldn't afford to give up. The villagers had fought too hard, endured too much to let it all end here. They were counting on him, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. If they could hold on just a little longer, maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to turn the tide. As the evolved humans began to unveil the truth, a shocking realization hit the group standing in front of them. They weren't the only ones who had arrived. The sky, once clear, now pulsed with an unnatural glow, as if the very atmosphere itself was bending under the weight of something unseen. A faint hum filled the air, subtle but growing louder, vibrating deep within their bones. Without warning, a series of figures cloaked in shadow descended from the sky. These weren't ordinary humans, or even the evolved ones they had come to trust. The figures, nearly translucent, shimmered with a terrifying energy, their faces cold and unreadable. They moved with precision, unfazed by the shockwaves their arrival caused. And with each step they took, the temperature around them dropped, the atmosphere growing thick and suffocating. The leader of the evolved humans, who had just begun to speak of humanity's transformation, fell silent. His voice, once commanding, now faltered. "No, it can't be." He staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief, as he looked upon the new arrivals. "The Dark Ones, they've returned." The crowd watched in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the gravity of what was happening. Who were these mysterious figures, and what did they want? The threat of an enemy older than time itself now loomed over the planet, the stakes higher than ever. If the evolved humans had come to guide humanity toward a brighter future, what would these new arrivals bring? A sudden surge of energy erupted from the Dark Ones, casting an eerie glow over everything in sight. It wasn't just a show of power, it was a warning. A warning that the truth the evolved humans had revealed might not be the whole truth. A deeper, darker force had always been lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tension between the two factions mounted as the evolved humans seemed to brace for a confrontation they never expected. The true nature of mankind's evolution, the very foundation of their existence, was being challenged in ways they had never imagined. Could the revelations they had shared with humanity have been incomplete, or worse, manipulated? Was the world they had come to protect really the same one that was slowly slipping away from their grasp? The Dark Ones had arrived to disrupt everything, and with them, the very truth of mankind's future hung in the balance. A battle for humanity's soul was about to enter a new, more dangerous phase, where trust would be tested and survival itself questioned. The confrontation between the evolved humans and the Dark Ones reached a boiling point. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath them trembled as both sides prepared for the inevitable clash. The leader of the evolved humans stepped forward, his voice steady, though the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. "You've come too late," he declared. "The truth has already been revealed, and humanity is ready." But the Dark Ones were unfazed, their cold eyes scanning the crowd, their presence almost suffocating. The leader of the Dark Ones raised a hand, and in an instant, a storm of shadows erupted from the ground, swirling around them like a living entity. "The truth you speak of is not the truth at all." The Dark One spoke in a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of time itself. "Humanity's evolution was never meant to be. What you've shown them is only an illusion. The true path is destruction." With a sharp motion, the Dark Ones unleashed a pulse of energy, a wave of darkness that sent shockwaves through the area, pushing back anyone who stood in their way. The evolved humans tried to counter, but their powers flickered, struggling to hold against the overwhelming force of the Dark Ones. As the battle raged, it became clear they were outmatched. But then, in a sudden and unexpected twist, the leader of the evolved humans collapsed to his knees, his eyes wide with horror. It's not what I thought," he whispered, as if coming to some painful realization. "We were never meant to lead. We were meant to protect, but we were misled. The Dark Ones, they were our creators." A gasp rippled through the crowd as the shocking truth unfolded before them. The evolved humans had been engineered to believe they were humanity's saviors, but they were, in fact, the product of the Dark Ones created to guide humanity into a new era of control. The very force they had feared was the one that had shaped them from the beginning. In that moment, the evolved humans had to make a choice. They could either continue the fight against their creators, or they could embrace the truth that had been kept hidden for so long. The leader stood, his face resolute. If this is the truth, then it's time we take control of our own destiny. We will no longer be tools in the hands of those who seek to destroy. With that, a new energy surged through the evolved humans, a power born not from their creators, but from within themselves. They fought back with everything they had, breaking free from the influence of the Dark Ones. The battle reached its peak, the skies lit with blinding flashes of light and shadow as both sides clashed in a final, desperate struggle. And just as it seemed, the evolved humans would triumph. The unthinkable happened. The ground beneath them split open, revealing a hidden force deeper than the Dark Ones themselves. From the chasm, a figure emerged, a being neither human nor evolved, but something beyond comprehension. Its presence was suffocating, its eyes glowing with an ancient, unfathomable power, the true force behind everything. The creators of the creators. It was then that the last, most unsettling truth was revealed. Humanity, in all its forms, had never been in control. The evolved humans, the Dark Ones, and even the mysterious new being were all part of a cycle. A cycle that had repeated itself countless times, with each iteration believing it was the final one, the one to break free. But the cycle could never be broken, because it wasn't just about humanity's future, it was about something much larger, something much older. The Earth itself had always been the battlefield, and every evolution, every conflict had been designed to test one simple question: could humanity ever truly escape the grasp of the universe's creators? And with that, the story came to a close. The truth of humanity's evolution was no longer a matter of victory or defeat. It was an endless loop, a question without an answer. And the real revelation: the Earth, in its quiet, unassuming way, was never really home. It was always a prison. As the final light of the battle faded, the screen went black, leaving the audience with a chilling realization. The story wasn't over. It had only just begun. The silence that followed the revelation was deafening. The world felt as if it had stopped turning. The battle had ceased, but the war was far from over. The beings who had once been humanity's saviors now found themselves standing on the precipice of an unimaginable truth. They were not the end of the cycle, but just another phase in its endless repetition. The ancient, incomprehensible figure from the chasm looked down upon them, its glowing eyes piercing through the very fabric of their existence. Its voice, when it spoke, resonated like a thunderclap, its words reverberating deep in their minds. You think you've broken free, but the truth is far darker. The cycle has never been about breaking free. It is about understanding. The leader of the evolved humans, now standing alone in the face of this ultimate revelation, looked toward the others. The battle had been lost, but the fight for humanity's soul had yet to be decided. His mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide. He had to believe there was more to this story, that humanity's fate hadn't been sealed by those who had created them. We understand nothing, he finally said, his voice filled with a mix of defiance and sorrow. But we will. If we are not the end, then we must be the beginning of something else. A future where the cycle ends, not with destruction, but with creation. The figure before them seemed to pause, a ripple of something akin to amusement passing through it. Creation, you say? But do you truly understand what you're asking for? Humanity has never created. It has always been shaped by forces beyond your comprehension. Your evolution has been nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. You are the final product of an ancient experiment, and you will continue to repeat your role for as long as you exist. But even in the face of such overwhelming truth, the evolved humans refused to yield. They had tasted freedom, and no matter how fragile it seemed, they weren't ready to give it up. They had seen the possibility of a future where they could shape their own destiny, and they would fight for it. The battle that followed was not one of violence, but of wills. The leader of the evolved humans stepped forward, his voice unwavering. We may have been shaped, but we are not slaves. We choose our own path. The cycle ends with us. As the figure from the chasm looked upon him, its expression unreadable, it let out a long, resonant sigh. So be it. The cycle will now take a new shape, one you cannot yet comprehend. But remember, it is not your will that matters. It is the will of those who created you. You are but a shadow of what once was. And just as the figure spoke those words, everything changed. The world around them began to dissolve, as if the very fabric of reality was being rewritten. The evolved humans, caught in the sudden shift, could feel the pull of an immense force. Their bodies, their minds, their very essence seemed to stretch and twist as the boundaries of their existence blurred. For a moment, there was nothing, just a vast, empty expanse where the world they knew once stood. Then, as quickly as it had come, the change stopped. The evolved humans found themselves standing on a new plane of existence. The world they had known, Earth, humanity, the conflict, had all disappeared. What lay before them was not destruction, but something else. Something new. The leader of the evolved humans looked around, trying to make sense of their new reality. Is this the end? He asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and fear. One of the others, a woman who had fought alongside him, stepped forward. No, she said softly. I think this is where it all truly begins. The sky above them was no longer the sky they had known. It was vast, filled with swirling galaxies and distant stars. The ground beneath them was not solid, but a shimmering surface that seemed to pulse with energy. It was as if they had stepped into the heart of the universe itself, a place where time, space, and reality, as they understood it, had no meaning. And in that place, they found the answers they had been seeking. The truth of humanity's existence was far more complex than any of them could have imagined. The earth, the cycle, the struggle, it had all been part of a grand experiment, an effort to understand the true nature of creation itself. And now, standing at the edge of that understanding, the evolved humans realized the ultimate truth. They had been given the power to shape not just their own future, but the future of everything. The universe, the cycle, the darkness, and light, they were all part of a greater whole, and the evolved humans were now the key to its transformation. The leader, feeling the weight of this realization, turned to the others. This is our moment, he said. The cycle ends here, but not with destruction. We are the creators now. We will build a future where humanity is free, not just from the dark ones, but from all the forces that seek to control us. We will no longer be pawns in a game we don't understand. We will be the architects of our own destiny. And with that, the evolved humans began the task of reshaping the universe. It was not an easy task, and it would not happen overnight. But they had the power to create, to change, and to guide humanity toward a new beginning. A beginning where they were no longer victims of the cycle, but its masters. As the final moments of the story unfolded, the audience was left with one final, lingering thought. The true power of humanity lies not in its ability to fight, but in its ability to choose, to create, to shape the world around them, no matter how dark or uncertain the path may seem. The cycle may never truly end, but humanity's will to create will always be its greatest strength. And so, as the screen faded to black, the audience was left with the knowledge that the journey of humanity was far from over. It had only just begun.